Welcome to Our Hen House. This is Jasmine Singer.
And this is Marianne Sullivan.
Thank you so much for joining us this week. Marianne's guest this week is Kate Wall, who is a lobbyist for the International Fund for Animal Welfare. IFAW does work all over the world, of course, but they will be talking about legislation in the U.S., what we are seeing from the Biden administration, what needs to happen to address the ever-strengthening crisis in biodiversity, the connection to pandemics, and some specific legislative proposals which may see some success in the near future.
This was a good interview because even though Kate does seem to have a firm grasp on how bad things are, she doesn't really pussyfoot, so to speak. She does have a certain amount of hope. She's working on specific things that she thinks she can make happen. So, she and others can make happen. So this might be a good interview if you're feeling down. On the Flock bonus segment, I'll be continuing my conversation with Kate. And as always, if you are a Flock member, you'll get the link to the bonus segment in your email on the Tuesday after the podcast episode goes up. You can always find it on the Flock Facebook group. And if you're not a member of the Flock and you can afford it, you can join for $10 a month at ourhenhouse.org/donate.
Also, if you're a member of the Flock, please join us for our Flock First Friday Zoom calls, which are once a month on the first Friday of the month at 4 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time, where we focus on how to be better activists and how to take care of ourselves. And we speak to some inspiring guests. This past week, which was the first Friday, we spoke with Thomas Goodman, who you might recall as a very recent podcast guest who had some really, really cool tips and suggestions on some more grassroots ways that we can all get involved on our own free time with changing the world for animals. So if you're a member of the Flock, check out the Flock Facebook group for updates or write to us at info@ourhenhouse.org. And just a reminder, if you're in the Flock, please set up a one-on-one with me on Zoom if you're interested. We could chat about your activism and your veganism, things you're struggling with, things you're proud of, whatever. Email Jen at ourhenhouse.org. Oh, and I did want to mention that it's October somehow. I always struggle with understanding how the summer is over, but also fall is my very favorite month. So here we are in my very favorite month. And October is quite a big, busy month for us. This month, we are going to be launching the audiobook series of the book Anti-Racism in Animal Advocacy, Igniting Cultural Transformation. Every Thursday in October, we will be bringing you another part of that book series. So there's 4 in total. So there's 4 Thursdays. That works out well. And it all corresponds with that new book, Anti-Racism in Animal Advocacy. I'm the editor of that book. And we at our Hen House are so excited to be bringing you this audiobook series. Of course, this is in addition to your regular Our Hen House podcast every Saturday, to the Animal Law podcast once a month, and to, if you're a Flock member, your weekly bonus content. Needless to say, we've been very busy over here. How have things been going for you? Marianne, have you been having fun in the animal advocacy realm? Fun is a weird word.
Yeah, it really is. Have you met me? It's kind of all our hen house all the time. You set aside the month, everybody. Well, you're not drinking your pumpkin spice, whatever.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny. When we were planning on what to say for the top of the show right now, I was like, we could talk about pumpkins, and you basically started screaming, no. Why are we going to be yet another?
Scream.
You screamed on the inside, be honest.
I am permanently screaming on the inside.
Well, it is everywhere. I went to Trader Joe's the other day, which just seems to have more and more vegan everything. And it was like I walked into a giant pumpkin, and I did buy pumpkin coffee beans. I'll have you know, I had them this morning. They were lovely.
Well, I don't even understand what that means. I don't know. I'm all for it. Like, if people want to eat more, it used to be when I was a kid, but up until really not that long ago, the pumpkins weren't even a food source except for pie. You could get pie, but other than that, you did not eat pumpkins. But now they're in everything. It is a little bizarre. But getting back to the question at hand, what have I been doing vis-a-vis animal activism? Well, one thing I did was I listened to a lecture I try to do this more, but like now that you can go to every single conference and every single lecture online, it's like hard to keep up. But anyway, I went to this lecture at the Yale Animal Program, which is an excellent program, and they have some excellent talks, and they're online. They're easy to find. And this was with Peter Godfrey Smith, and I bought his most recent book maybe 6 months ago, and like so many other books, it's still sitting there waiting for me to read it. But I do want to read it. Most recently, the book I bought is called Metazoa, Animal Life and the Birth of the Mind. And he's also written a book, I think that was a pretty big seller, called Other Minds, which focused a lot on octopuses. It was a very erudite talk. To tell you the truth, I had trouble following some of it. There were questions about consciousness. He talked a bit about insects, what to do about whether insects are conscious. And he talked about how we understand animal consciousness. And I think somewhat controversially in his world, he posited perhaps there is a middle ground between consciousness and unconsciousness. Maybe insects have a different, he wasn't just saying that there's a different level of consciousness. I think a lot of people would agree with that, but that there's actually a middle ground, something that isn't quite consciousness. Anyway, as you can see, it was pretty serious stuff. A lot went over my head. And he also talked a little bit about, I guess, what you would call activism and the difference in approaches between questions of where we can achieve consensus. And he posited factory farming as someplace where we can achieve a lot of consensus. A lot of people are against factory farming. And where we can't, which he mentioned humane farming. And then I find out that he's not vegan. I mean, what the actual fuck? I just, like, this guy spends his life thinking about animal consciousness. He said, which is kind of interesting and something to keep an eye on, he's struggling with ethical issues and wasn't sure where he would come out, but at the moment, it's humane farming. Which apparently he thinks is humane. Has he looked at it at all in all of his studying? Does he look into like what humane farming actually means and whether it's scalable?
Well, that's the thing. I have been so perturbed lately, especially more so than I feel like I ever have been, by the fact that the ceiling for so many people is to work within an oppressive structure. It just seems like impossible for people to understand that there might be an alternate way because, they are basically lazy. There's lazy ethics left and right. But for someone like this, it's particularly unnerving because this person's actually thinking about it. He's lifting the veil.
Well, that's exactly it. It's like we tend to think, well, it's cognitive dissonance. People just don't really allow their minds to go there. But this is somebody who's obviously really smart. Smartness doesn't get you much, does it? In the way of being sensible. And I don't think you could call this cognitive dissonance. Maybe you could. I don't know. But I found this quote online. I find this unbelievable. This is a man who studies octopuses, is fascinated by octopuses, writes about octopuses. I am not a vegetarian, and in general, I try to avoid eating the products of cruel factory farming. Compared to other kinds of meat, octopuses are not a particularly bad animal to include in your diet, as octopuses are wild-caught, short-lived, and not endangered. I just have no hope.
Well, this reminds me of last year.
Talk me down, Jasmine. Talk me down.
I've been trying to for like 15 years, and I don't think I've done anything except make it worse. But I remember discussing the octopus teacher with you last year. It was probably a year ago, almost exactly. And this reminds me so much of that because there was like the octopus teacher in so many ways wound up being a big giant metaphor for people of like friendship and, the mystery of life. But it didn't break that glass ceiling of an oppressive mindset. You know what I mean? So like, there's something about like non-farmed animals specific. Obviously, octopuses are farmed animals, but like non-land farmed animals specifically, that when people are trying to make sense of their feelings about animals, it's much easier for them to like focus on octopuses or other sea life as opposed to focusing on, what they're eating as they're writing that blog.
I think you're being entirely too kind, to tell you the truth. This guy knows a lot about octopuses. It's not like he's one of these people who just think octopuses are like I don't, like not conscious or whatever. That's his study. I think you're being too kind. I'm sure he eats all the other animals as well. It's just the brain deadness of like, I don't have to do what is right here because I'm human. I don't know. Though he tries to avoid eating the products of cruel factory farming. Well, look into what humane farming means. Like you're an academic, study something. Just drove me crazy. On the other hand, I want everybody to listen to this month's Animal Law podcast. And it was David Michelson. It's very different from the usual Animal Law podcast. Usually we talk about a case. Usually I interview a lawyer. David Michelson is not a lawyer. He's an activist. And he is part of this group, not a terribly large group of activists in Oregon who are doing a ballot initiative. IP13 is the ballot initiative. And we both agreed that maybe IP13 would be bad luck for animal abusers. You have to listen to it because I really hesitated about whether to do an interview about it because it seems so out there, but it's so beyond what you have imagined could be accomplished by the law. And, I'm not saying it can be accomplished. They're pretty realistic about this is not this is not a slam dunk, but basically they want to make Oregon a sanctuary state and make it so that you can't kill animals or hurt animals or harm animals in Oregon. They want to take basically the cruelty law, which every state has, and get rid of all of the exemptions. So you can't do it for any of the reasons that everybody is cruel to animals for. It's I don't even know whether I'm explaining it well. It's kind of mind-blowing and sounds so ridiculous. But when I talked to him, it didn't sound that ridiculous. And one of the things I love that he pointed out was that, well, a couple of things. One of the things he mentioned, I think it was over 50% of people when surveyed say we should abolish slaughterhouses. Like what? These are people who eat meat. This plays to the fact that people are so confused about the way they think about animals that this is just an opportunity to kind of let them know, well, this is what we do to animals and we think we shouldn't. And regardless of whether they're going to win, the other thing that he pointed out that I thought was so cool was that women's suffrage was passed in Oregon with a ballot initiative, and they had to do it 6 times. They had to get those signatures 6 times and do it over and over. It was not, it just helped to open the conversation. And they just kept doing it until enough people realized, oh, right, they're right. It's just like, all right, I'm giving away too much. Just listen to the episode. It's so good.
I am very excited about everyone listening to this and also about your interview today with Kate. But before we get to that, I just want to go back to something. Speaking of things, so many things that are mind-blowing that we're discussing on the show today. I want to give a non-recommendation for a movie that people should not watch.
I think I can manage to not watch something.
Okay, perfect. See, you're doing really well with your homework already. So it's a new movie on Netflix called Starling or The Starling. And it's starring...
I saw the ads for that. I was going to watch it.
You can't, no, don't. Trust me, don't. So there might be like, not a big spoiler here, but yeah, no, it's not really a spoiler. It's like maybe the tiniest itty bitty, not big deal spoiler. So, but it's with Melissa McCarthy and I love her so much. So anyway, the very first scene, she and her husband, this is like a flashback, are painting their baby's room, and the baby's there. And they're talking about what she's going to be when she grows up, what the baby's going to be. This is literally the first 60 seconds of the movie. The husband says something like, I'm pretty sure she's going to run a butcher shop. And the Melissa McCarthy character is like, what? A butcher shop? And he goes, well, I don't know. And she said, like, maybe a vegan butcher shop. And he's like, okay, a vegan butcher shop so that they could serve like cauliflower wings and she won't have to kill animals. And it was like this cute little moment, right? And I thought about it like, the fact that even in this magical fictional land where they have this idea that their child is ethical enough that she would never grow up and kill animals, even in this construct that we are opting into believing to watch this movie, it doesn't occur to them to go vegan. Like they have to save for when their little baby is 30 and runs a butcher shop. make it a vegan one. Anyway, it just annoyed me. And I wanted to tell you, don't watch the movie because there is cruelty to animals in it. And it is CGI. The animals are definitely not real. They're birds, but it is nothing that anyone will enjoy watching.
Well, all right? I mean, I won't watch the movie because I don't want to see that. But is the message of the movie bad? Other than the fact, like, you can dream of your children being vegan and not go vegan
Right.
yourself.
Other than that has nothing to do with the movie. So like a big trauma happens. Again, that's on the back jacket of the VHS tape in my mind that still exists. A big trauma happens and it's about how they overcome it. And one of the ways that Melissa McCarthy sort of deals with it is shown metaphorically through these starlings who are in her backyard, who she has like a sort of hateful relationship with. And it's about her coming to terms with her own trauma while she's coming to terms with the birds that are shown as very aggressive in her backyard. And it's not kind. And I don't find it funny. I find it very disturbing. And you wouldn't be able to handle it. Trust me. Like there's cruelty to animals.
I accept that there's cruelty to animals and I don't want to watch it. I just thought it might have a good message about animals, even though.
Nope. I mean, yeah, metaphorically.
Then now it sounds a little bit like the octopus teacher problem, which we're coming full circle. Like, isn't it wonderful that people have like these interesting relationships with animals that help them in their lives?
Exactly. And that sort of juxtaposed with my giant crush on Melissa McCarthy, which she's clearly breaking my heart. It's very personal. And B, the fact that like it sort of started off with this like positive vegan statement made it a no-go for me. Anyway, I didn't know I was going to talk about that. For some reason, we were touching on issues on this conversation that sort of reminded me of like our disappointment in humans, especially in moments like that. But the good news is there's a lot to be hopeful about, which is the whole point of our hen house. There's not just bad movies, there's good movies. There's not just bad apples, there's good apples. There's not just oppressors, there's people who give a hell. I was going to say give a hell because I didn't want to say give a fuck but give a hell doesn't work. So there are people who give a fuck, and I'm sorry if you're offended by my language. I'm sure you'll email me.
The only people I like are the people who are listening to this podcast. Unless you're mean, in which case I don't like you, but I bet most of you aren't.
Okay.
Unless you're listening to it to laugh at us.
Let's get to the end.
Then I don't like you.
Okay. Well, let's get to the interview before we continue to expose our inner child and treat our hen house as therapy, which it can be.
You mean that's bad?
No, it's
I might have to change the way I've done this for like 12 years.
Okay. We'll work on it. Kate Wall is the Senior Legislative Manager with the U.S. Office of the International Fund for Animal Welfare, representing wildlife and habitat conservation, wildlife trafficking, and appropriations priorities before the federal legislature. She will be joining Marianne right after this.
Hey, our Hen House listeners. It's Siobhan O'Sullivan here from Sydney, Australia, just dropping into this episode to share some exciting news. ASA is the Australasian Animal Studies Association. That's AASA, the Australasian Animal Studies Association. ASA has just launched 2 new prizes which are open to people all around the world. The first prize, which is for the best journal article by an early career academic, is valued at 500 Australian dollars. The other prize that we're running in 2021 is for the best popular communications on an animal studies or animal protection issue. It's also valued at $500. To learn more about the prizes, go to the AASA website, that's www.animalstudies.org.au. And please don't forget to spread the word. This prize is available to people from all around the world. The only thing you need to do is be a member of ASA, and ASA's membership is very reasonable at just 15 Australian dollars for the unwaged or for students. Submissions close on Tuesday the 19th of October 2021, so get submitting. Can't wait to read your nominations.
Welcome to our hen house, Kate.
Thank you, Marianne. It's so great to be with you today.
It's really a pleasure to have you. I don't think we've ever had somebody on from IFAW, so I thought we might just start out by having you tell us, in case there are some people who aren't that familiar with your work, what IFAW is and what kind of work it does.
So IFAW is the acronym for the International Fund for Animal Welfare. We are, as our name suggests, committed to animal welfare across the global stage. We have offices in 15 countries internationally, and we have programs in more than 40 countries around the globe. And we really focus on the intersection between animals and human beings. So a lot of our work focuses on finding innovative solutions to everyday problems like human wildlife conflict, like people involving themselves in illegal wildlife trade. Here in the US, we actually do a lot of disaster response work in addition to actually countries around the globe. And we recognize that we need to be engaged in really high level conservation issues, but also that each individual animal's life matters. So we really try to come at things from both of those perspectives.
I know that your work here in the United States involves a lot of lobbying and legislative work and policy work. Do you engage in that does IFAW engage in that kind of work throughout the world, or is it more rescue and maybe interpersonal relations with people that is on the international stage?
So we actually do both. We do have offices, as you said, I really focus on legislation, lobbying, policy here in the United States. We also have folks who focus on policy internationally. And so we have people on the ground in individual countries, but we also have people who really focus on intergovernmental organizations. So people who go to United Nations meetings, who go to CITES meetings, who go to the Convention on Biological Diversity meetings. So we're really trying to have an impact everywhere that we work in the policy arena, but also through rescue, rehabilitation, and community engagement. We recognize that all of those are important to achieving our goals.
That's a pretty big job that you've set out for yourselves. Exactly. You mentioned that you do lobbying and legislation in the United States. Can you just tell us exactly what your position is?
So my title is Senior Legislative Manager for IFAW's U.S. office. And what that really means is, while I mostly focus on federal legislation, I also do a little bit of work on state legislation when it comes up, and work with the administration. So trying to ensure that we have good policies for animal welfare and conservation in the United States.
And I know we want to talk about a very important specific issue that you're working on vis-a-vis wildlife corridors, but I thought maybe we'd start out going a little bit more big picture. And can you talk a little bit about kind of the crisis that we're in particularly vis-a-vis wild animals and biodiversity?
Absolutely. And I'm so glad that you asked this question, because I think it is one of the most important and least widely understood issues that we are facing globally right now. We are in what scientists are calling a biodiversity crisis. What that means is that we are losing wild species at a really unprecedented rate, at a rate much faster than we have seen in history. And frankly, at a rate that is too fast for evolution to keep up with. There was a report that came out from the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, or IPBES, which is a whole lot easier to say, in May of 2019, which demonstrated that as many as 1 million, that's 1 million species, not individual animals, but species, are at risk of extinction because of human activities. And what that really means, it's not just a problem for those of us who love animals and care about animals because we recognize that they have intrinsic value. This is actually an existential crisis for the planet, because like climate change, which as climates rise, we see devastating storms and sea level rise, and this can really impact human survival on Earth. The same is actually true of biodiversity loss. wild animals, native wild animals in particular, have evolved to be integral part of ecosystems. And that's kind of a fancy way of saying that you don't have trees and flowers and grasses without the animals that pollinate them, that spread their seed, that aerate the soil, that do all of the things that we need to have the air that we breathe, the food that we eat, the water that we drink. And so as we lose animal species, we may actually see ecosystems start to degrade, and ecosystems can actually just collapse entirely. And that means that we as human beings lose access to those fundamental building blocks of life: food, air, water. So it's really serious and something that we need to pay more attention to, both as part of the climate change crisis, but on its own. We really need to be addressing both of those things together and not thinking about them separately as we have been doing for so long.
Yeah, no, I find that a very compelling thought. And it seems obvious when you say it, but isn't very often that anybody says it. I mean, you pointed out that climate change drives biodiversity loss, which makes total sense. But then, we tend to think of that, well, that's unfortunate for those animals. But you also point out that the loss of biodiversity contributes to climate change, that it's a circular problem.
Absolutely. And I will say that climate change will become a more important driver as it exacerbates, as it becomes more intense. As of now, it's about the third most important driver of biodiversity loss. Ahead of it are actually habitat destruction and overconsumption, overhunting / overconsumption of wild animals. So, so I just point that out because people tend to think, well, if we solve climate change, we save the animals. And unfortunately, that's not true. But if we save the animals, we can actually help to reduce the impacts of climate change. For instance, whales are huge climate sinks. They eat lots of plankton out of the water. When they die, they decompose. They don't release that carbon into the air, but they sort of recycle it by decomposing and becoming food for other ocean species. When we talk about biodiversity writ large, we're talking not only about animals, but also, of course, about trees and flowers and grasses. And native mixes of trees and flowers and grasses are also tremendous carbon sinks. It's important to say here that you can't just plant trees and protect the climate, because it matters what trees you plant, what sorts of species you introduce, whether wild animals or plant life, because just like big monoculture forests that you're planning to cut down actually reduce biodiversity. They reduce animal biodiversity, they reduce plant biodiversity. And when they're cut down, they release carbon into the air. So they're actually a problem. What's a solution is finding ways to restore and protect native habitat and native wildlife. And that honestly protects us as well in a really tangible way that we just haven't quite grasped as a society yet.
This really reminds me of this expression, which I'm sure you've heard, which has always driven me crazy. And it's, if a tree falls in the forest and there's no one to hear it, does it make a sound? And the point is, it's like, if a tree falls in the forest, there's somebody to hear it, because there's all these animals, and it wouldn't be a forest if there weren't all these animals in it who can hear. But we do tend to think of all of these things as separate entities rather than integrally involved and necessary to each other. You have also said that biodiversity is the planet's mechanism for mitigating the effects of climate change. And also about that, even though we're not particularly focused on what ways loss of biodiversity affects humans, because we're talking about, we love animals. Humans,
Right.
But it is important for us to understand how human economies are tied to biodiversity, because that's an important argument that some people can only hear that argument. And so can you talk a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, so there is a false belief by some people in all levels of society, from individuals all the way up to decision makers, that there is a dichotomy, that it's sort of a zero-sum game. You either protect the economy or you protect the environment. But actually, the majority of our economy is based on the environment. I mean, if you don't have a healthy environment, you don't have anything to sell, and you don't have anyone to sell to, because that's all linked. Even more dramatic, I think, is that back in 2018, the Intergovernmental Platform on Climate Change, or the IPCC, released a report on land use and climate change. They actually found that this is sort of a fancy sentence, and I'll try and break it down a little bit. But the annual value of global terrestrial ecosystem services, so essentially the food, water, air that we as human beings get, the value that we as human beings get from healthy nature on land, not in the oceans, but just on land, is pretty much equal to global GDP. So as we erode healthy natural lands and healthy natural species, we are actually pulling money out of our pockets, because they have tremendous, the services that we get from them, the value that we get from having access to nature, essentially, is worth about as much as what we make annually through gross domestic product around the globe. And that's pretty significant. And that's not including the marine value. I mean, we all know that we get so much value from coral reef systems and from fish and from the cooling effects of the ocean and the ocean air currents. You start adding those in, and while I haven't seen studies on the exact impact, well, then you have far outweighed what we make as humans through international, global gross domestic product. So we really have to think seriously about, conserving those resources.
I think that's a valuable way of communicating it, because it is the kind of language that a lot of people can hear, but at the same time, it's almost ridiculous that we have to use that kind of language, because obviously if we lose the planet, like, it's not just a matter of GDP. It's game over, but people just don't seem to get that. You've actually spoken of a national biodiversity strategy. I'm not sure exactly what I saw that in an article that you wrote, and I'm not sure exactly what you meant by that. Can you explain what it would be?
Yeah, absolutely. So the current administration has talked a lot about a national climate strategy. And as part of that, and I should say that IFAW absolutely supports that strategy, as part of that national climate strategy, what they're doing is just ensuring that in every decision that's made by the federal government, they're taking into account what the impact will be on climate. And that's really important, because we are in a climate crisis, as we see from storms and wildfires and rising sea levels. What we would like to see is the same attention paid to biodiversity, so that when we are making decisions at a federal level, and honestly, this can be done at a state level as well, this can be done at an individual, at a municipal level, but when our decision makers are making plans for the future, we want to see them taking biodiversity into account and seeing what the impacts of a given plan or set of priorities might have on biodiversity, recognizing that as we lose biodiversity, we are putting ourselves in greater and greater peril.
Well, I mean, it would be great to have such a strategy, but perhaps a more likely topic for policymakers to take up right at the moment. And I know you're talking about, and one that it's kind of the third piece of this puzzle of climate biodiversity, and that's pandemics. And it is a really hot topic. I can't imagine why. But at the same time, it just boggles my mind that there seems to still be so little awareness of the danger of another pandemic arising from what we do to animals. We're talking about what we do to wild animals, what we do in the wet markets that almost certainly gave rise to this pandemic, in factory farms, which will almost certainly give rise to the next pandemic. And also, you talk about the connections between loss of biodiversity and pandemics. And I know you're working on something very specific here. Can you talk about this issue and what you're working on, and whether you see any rising awareness of how important this is?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, another huge passion, and one that I think is so timely, because we're all living an object lesson in what happens when we don't treat our natural world with respect. We have been locked down for more than 18 months now. We have tragically lost so many members of our intimate communities and the global community. Millions of people remain sick, and our economy has suffered setbacks that we will feel for decades to come, I'm sure. And that's all because we have not learned the lesson about how exploiting wildlife and the natural world can rebound and hurt us in return. So COVID-19 is not the first zoonotic pathogen to erupt from the natural world. And again, just fancy words for animal-borne disease. So a disease that originates in wild animals or domestic animals and spills over, well, a disease that originates in animals that aren't human beings is called zoonotic. And COVID-19, as you said, almost certainly came from a live wildlife market in China. About 100 years before, back in the 1920s, HIV came out of Kinshasa when, probably as part of the trade in chimpanzee meat and bush meat. We've known that for, about 2 decades now, that's where patient zero was. But we haven't taken steps to change our relationship with wildlife as a global society. SARS also came from a wildlife market. Ebola came from habitat destruction that led to more interaction between human beings and wildlife. These things happen again and again. And sometimes we get, quote unquote, lucky. These pathogens strike human beings and they don't lead to a global pandemic. Believe it or not, in the case of COVID-19, we've gotten a little bit lucky in that it is not more deadly, it is not more contagious, and it doesn't take longer to manifest. Think about it. HIV spread to the human population in the 1920s, but we didn't know about it here in the US until the mid to late 1980s. It took that long for it to manifest because its incubation time is so long. Ebola kills such a great number of people who are infected, but it's not as infectious as COVID-19. And, the common cold may be more infectious than COVID-19, but it's not as deadly. If we hit that magic number of something as infectious as the common cold or chicken pox, as deadly as Ebola, as long to manifest as HIV, you can just imagine what that would make the population look like. It's really scary. And what we can do to protect against that is to crack down on illegal wildlife trade, stop consumption of wildlife, stop deforestation and habitat destruction, stop animal exploitation of animals who are in captivity, stop breeding wild animals in farms. I mean, these are some fairly basic things, and they don't actually take that much shift in the way we think about the natural world, but they could really protect us and future generations from another and even more severe pandemic. They could have protected us against COVID, frankly.
You're working on some legislation relevant to that?
So we are. IFAW is part of a coalition of groups that has been working with some congressional champions on the Preventing Future Pandemics Act. That is championed in the Senate by Senators John Cornyn, a Republican of Texas, and Cory Booker, a Democrat from New Jersey, and in the House by Representatives Mike Quigley, a Democrat from Illinois, and Fred Upton, a Republican from Michigan. And what this bill would do is, through diplomacy and other means, allow the U.S. to work with countries globally to close down live wildlife markets where animals are sold for human consumption, like the one in Wuhan, China, where we believe COVID-19 originated. Believe it or not, we even have a few live wildlife markets here in the US. It would also vastly expand the US reach globally to work with countries to crack down on illegal wildlife trafficking. It's a US approach that takes the whole globe into account and, requires the US to do some things here in our backyard, like shutting down illegal wildlife markets, actually shutting down the import, export, and trade of live wild animals in the US for human consumption, and then working with nations abroad through diplomacy to do the same sorts of things.
It sounds very powerful and very important, but at the same time, there is still the problem. I mean, I'm thinking specifically of the Amazon. You were talking about how loss of habitat is also, as we encroach on these animals' habitat, regardless of whether we're dealing in them or eating them or, just doing any of these things, as we encroach on these animals' habitat, these more and more of these potential diseases are going to get out, aren't they?
They absolutely are. And that's why I say this short-term approach of putting profit first without recognizing what we are destroying and what we are losing, the value of what we are losing, not just the monetary value, but the value to our lives, our livelihoods, our health, our well-being, not to mention the joy that I at least find, and I'm sure you and your listeners find, at knowing that these wild animals exist and roam free in forests around the world. It's a mistaken way of looking at the economy and what we value in the US and globally. And I think that that's going to be something that we have to examine in coming days. And maybe this is a time in history when we can do that, because like the world wars, like other touchstone points, tipping points in history, I think that the COVID-19 pandemic may have opened enough minds to really start thinking systemically about how we shape our relationship with the world around us. We may not be there yet, but we do have some really exciting news to report in that on September 23rd, the House passed its National Defense Authorization Act, which funds the military and military projects and is one of the few pieces of legislation that we can reliably count on to pass out of Congress every single year. This time around, they actually included some big pieces of that Preventing Future Pandemics Act in their security legislation. So that was a recognition by the House of Representatives that we need to rethink our approach to our treatment of wildlife around the world, that how we treat the natural world is a security issue, and an acknowledgement that the way we've been doing things in the past has led us to where we are right now. And while that isn't a panacea, while it's not a magic pill that's going to make all future pandemics go away and fix our relationship with nature automatically, I think it's a really positive step that shows we are starting to make some good progress.
I love to talk to people who have hope.
Well, we have to have hope. We have to have hope in the
sometimes it's hard, Kate. Sometimes it's hard.
I know, but if we don't have hope, then we shut down. Or
right.
If I don't have hope, I shut down, and then we can't change anything.
No, I often say that hope is a strategy, which I don't mean that that's all you need to do, that it will accomplish something to have hope, but that you adopt hope as a strategic move, so to get you to do things, because you really do. You don't do anything. So aside from, what about the administration? You've talked about a little bit of progress in Congress, which seems impossible. I don't know how you deal with the federal government these days. It's like, I don't even understand what our federal government is anymore.
You move from win to win, right? When you find a win, you hold on to it and you use that strategically, as you say, Marianne, to get you going for the next thing.
Bless you. But what about the administration? Have you seen progress from the administration?
Yes and no. I think that the administration has taken some really bold and important actions, particularly around climate, around the 30 by 30 initiative, which for folks who aren't aware of it, is a commitment to preserve 30% of lands and waters in the United States by 2030. I think these are positive steps. They're not as far as I would like to see the administration go, and frankly, as I think we need to see the administration go to really keep us from falling off that biodiversity loss cliff.
Yeah, no, that's my sense too, that there have been steps, but they're just really not good enough. Well, that kind of brings us to the bill that you've been working on, which you have a lot of hope for, in addition to the one you just spoke about. I know that roadkill is a big problem. Obviously, anybody who drives on our roads knows that roadkill is a big problem. But really, what you talk about it as a issue of wildlife corridors. And roadkill is huge, but it even goes beyond that, doesn't it?
Absolutely, it does. So, wildlife corridors, there's a little confusion. And I'll admit, when I first started working on this issue, I shared this confusion that wildlife corridors and wildlife crossings were the same thing. So, if I may, I'm just going to start out by explaining the terminology so that folks understand what I'm talking about. So, wildlife crossings are structures that we build that go either over or under roads, over or under waterways, over or under tracks, or other man-made obstructions, fences, etc., that allow wildlife to safely pass over a highway, for instance, to avoid traffic and get where they need to go. Those crossing structures can be part of broader corridors. And what a corridor is essentially a way to link two protected areas. And when I talk about protected areas, we could be talking about national parks or state parks. We could also just be talking about, sort of forests or fields on someone's property where there's a lot of wildlife, but that's cut off from other forests and fields that wildlife needs to get to in order to find food, water, other members of its species, so that it can, so that animals can reproduce. And what corridors do is really expand the network of usable land that wildlife has access to. Sort of think about it as though the floor is lava, right? You think you have this protected area, say it's a national park, and you have lots of deer and chipmunks and bison and wolves and other things. And then you have kind of this developed area where the floor is lava. They can't get through, they can't get around. It's blocking them into this little island of protected area. But you have this other protected area on the other side of that developed space that has bison and chipmunks and wolves and deer that need to get to one another, that need to be able to intermingle their genetic material, that may need to move in response to temperature changes, seasonal changes, climate change, forest fires, all the other things that human beings are dealing with. Imagine if we were in California dealing with these horrendous fires, we went to evacuate and we hit a brick wall and there was no way around that wall. The corridors are kind of the passageways through those metaphorical brick walls, or sometimes literal brick walls, that allow wildlife to move around to get where they need to go.
Tell us about the bill that you've been working on.
So there has been, for many Congresses now, a bill introduced in both the House and Senate called the Wildlife Corridors Conservation Act, which would provide support and funding for wildlife corridors, a network of wildlife corridors around the country. And what that support and funding would do would be allow the federal government, which owns lots of land in various places around the country, state governments, which also own lots of land within their own states, and voluntary private landholders who, of course, as you know, even if you own a condo, you're a private landowner, right? Would allow these folks all to collaborate on a voluntary basis to identify places where wildlife corridors could be beneficial and work together to institute them. Say you're a landowner and you are fortunate enough to have a beautiful property on the edge of a state park, which then borders a federal park. And your land has, over the years, been developed in some way. Say you've got fencing on it that was put there to keep wildlife out or keep animals in some way. Maybe a road runs through your property, or a road runs through the state land property that cuts off animals from the federal property to yours, from one park to your property. You could go to your land resources manager and say, I really want to make my land better for wildlife. I know we have a lot of wildlife around here, but I've got these old fences. The thing is, it would be really expensive to change them or remove them. You could get a grant through the program that this bill would put together that could allow you to move your fences, change your fences, remove your fences, maybe put in some native plants to bring pollinators, depending on the species of animal that you wanted to allow on or to bring onto your property. And essentially, by working in concert together, you could get this set of corridors that could link all of that wonderful land together, from the federal park to the state park to your land. Maybe your neighbor would get involved. And eventually, we're hoping that a system of wildlife corridors could be built all around the nation, really allowing wildlife to migrate and do the things that wildlife need to do, that animals need to do to survive, and that we need them to do so that we can survive.
It sounds like a brilliant idea. It really does. And I'm really hopeful for this legislation. What is its status right now?
The legislation has been introduced in the House, and pieces of the the legislation as a whole was attached to the Invest Act, which was an infrastructure bill that passed out of the House. Now, part of the legislation, not the whole thing, but some funding for wildlife crossings, which are the structures we talked about earlier, was included in a Senate infrastructure bill that has not passed out of the Senate yet. And it's a little unclear on the timing of these two bills and what will happen with them. But we are really hoping that we can, in the final bill package that comes together, maintain some of that funding, either for corridors or for crossings, or ideally for both, for that whole system. And just to revisit crossings a little bit, one of the reasons I think that they are maybe a little bit easier for folks to understand is that the crossings are the pieces that really relate to roadkill. And it shocked me when I learned this. But do you know that in the US, every year, we as a nation spend $8 billion, that's billion with a B, dollars on wildlife vehicle collisions? It's huge. That's every year.
Oh my God. That is, I mean, I knew the numbers were big, but because the numbers have to be big, because you go out in the car every day and you see a dead animal. I mean, it's unbelievable, the mayhem out there, but that is a staggering number.
There aren't any real statistics on how many animals are killed. I mean, this is costing us hundreds of lives, thousands of injuries, and billions of dollars. You can only imagine that the majority of animals killed aren't actually causing significant damage to a car. So the number of animals killed is astronomical. So if we can build in these crossings and cut down on these collisions, we not only protect human life and human property, but we make a tremendous improvement in the lives of wildlife. And, I would encourage your listeners to go online and Google wildlife crossings, because these structures have started to be built not only here in the United States, but all over the world. And I will tell you, they make for amazing viewing. Talk about clickbait. You see the most animals take to these like fish to water. And you start to see the most wonderful relationships. You see different species of animals frolicking across bridges together. You realize they're friends. You see bears coming one way and coyotes coming another way, and hedgehogs and salamanders. I mean, animals don't want to be hit by cars any more than we want to hit them. And so when we invest in these structures, we are really creating a win-win-win for everyone involved.
Yeah. And, to bring it kind of full circle, as you point out, like we tend to think that, that climate is the big problem for wild animals. And of course, we're right. I mean, climate is and will become bigger. But if we could at least fix these other things that we can actually fix, we give them a little bit more of a chance. And like climate currently, as you pointed out, isn't even the greatest threat to wildlife at this current moment. So we have to do everything we can, and then also tackle climate, which is, a little bit more challenging. But this isn't challenging. This is just we can build roads. I mean, that's one thing we're good at.
It's absolutely true. We're very good at this. We have a lot of really brilliant people working in departments of transportation all over the country, indeed all over the world, who have identified great ways to help wildlife cross roads, both over and under, cross waterways, work in waterways. I mean, you can have wildlife corridors that are marine corridors for species like whales that need to get around buoys and shipping lanes and other things. You can have river waterways that help salmon and other fish avoid or get around dams and other man-made impediments. So you're right, these are simple fixes. We have the answers. What we need is the will to invest in them and to recognize how important they are, not only for the animals, but for ourselves. And these are actually one of the quickest, most simple fixes for climate change, because just as we're going to see human beings move as a result of rising temperatures and rising sea levels, well, you're going to see animals having to move as well. Animals are starting to lose food sources or be more bothered by mosquitoes and other insects as a result of changing temperatures. If we give them corridors that allow them to migrate from an area that is more impacted to an area that is less impacted by climate, we're helping them to solve their climate crisis as well.
Yeah, that's a really important point. Migration, no doubt, is going to become even more important to wild animals than it has been in the past. I know that at the point that we're recording this is already in motion, and I don't know exactly where it will be when people are listening to this, but assuming that everything isn't fixed by then, what can people do to support this bill?
So one of the most important things that people can do is get involved in the legislative process. I know that can seem really daunting because, especially at the federal level, it almost feels like our legislators are on Mount Olympus, right? Or at least it used to feel that way to me.
I'm not sure Mount Olympus is exactly how I would describe where they are, but but I won't go. I know you have to be nice to these people, so I won't go on.
Let's just say that they feel really removed from the rest of us.
Yes, that's fair. That's fair.
They're far away and we can't reach them and we don't know how to contact them. And it's just totally beyond anything that we can do.
It feels like a waste of time.
Right?
Especially for animal advocates, I think, because we've heard so often in the past that, they received a million cards on this law and they just ignore them. They just, you just feel that they ignore people who care about animals more than they ignore even other people.
And that can be true. But I've also been in offices, and these are real stories. I've been in offices where a chief of staff has come out and said, okay, talk to me. We got 150,000 emails on this yesterday. We know that our constituents care about this. We're ready to sit down and listen.
Good. And
that's one of the reasons that we were successful in passing the ivory ban in the United States a few years ago, because of citizen involvement. And we actually hear this over and over again. We have legislators on both sides of the aisle who say, my boss I care about this because I get more email on wildlife than I do on any other two issues from my constituents combined. I know they care about this, so I care about it too. And so it can feel like an uphill battle, and you're not always going to meet a legislator who reacts and responds in that way. But the reality is, most of them really do care about what their constituents think and feel. And if people are not getting the response they want from legislators, it may be because their voices are being drowned out by others in their districts or their states who feel like their voices won't be heard. So really, the worst that can happen to you if you contact your legislator is that they won't respond. That's absolutely the worst thing that can happen. And that's not very dangerous. So I think the best thing that we can do is make sure that our voices are heard and encourage our friends and family to do the same. It's so hard to get out of the apathy because there's so much going on and so many demands on our time. But when you feel passionately about something, if you don't speak up and make sure that you're counted, then you can't count on others to do the same. And we won't see change. So the best thing we can do is to make our voices heard. And I will make a shameless plug for IFAW right now. If you go to www.ifaw, that's IFAW.org, we have a lot of landing pages that can help you easily contact your legislator on some of the issues that we've talked about here today. We have, letters that you can automatically send. I encourage you to put them into your own words, but you can do it as easily as the click of a couple buttons. You can find your legislators' contact information. You can even find out who all of your legislators are. And I just say, get involved. And if you don't have the time or the energy to get involved at the federal level, which I understand it can be a lot, don't forget, you've got probably city councilors or town councilors, county councilors, state legislators. A lot of those folks are your neighbors, your friends, people you shop at the grocery store with. And you can actually make a lot of change right in your own neighborhood by having conversations with those neighbors and your other friends and relations in your area. Not all change has to come from the federal government. It's great to get a federal law passed, but it's also fantastic to get a town law passed or a city law passed, a county law passed. That can also make a huge impact.
I actually want to get into more detail with you, but I think we're going to have to do that on our bonus segment because unfortunately we're running out of time here. But this has been fascinating and really helpful and really inspiring that there is a possibility. Like I said, it's nice to talk to somebody with hope that there are possibilities of something we can accomplish for wild animals. So thanks so much for joining us today, Kate.
I've really enjoyed it, Marianne. Thank you so much for having me.
Jasmine here. We're so excited to announce the upcoming release of the groundbreaking new book, Anti-Racism in Animal Advocacy, Igniting Cultural Transformation, published by Lantern Books and Media. Inspired by Encompass's racial equity trainings, this collection of essays was written by farmed animal protection leaders, myself included, who are committed to exploring and prioritizing racial equity as we work to create a more effective and just animal protection movement. We wish to document our stories and processes in an exploratory space from which we can grow and use our words to hold ourselves and our peers accountable, ultimately creating new paths forward. I'm lucky enough to be the editor of the book. The only way to be an effective animal activist is to prioritize anti-racism within our advocacy. This essay collection will provide a new, necessary way forward. Anti-Racism in Animal Advocacy, Igniting Cultural Transformation is new as of September 2021 and is a collaboration between Our Hen House, Encompass, Sentient Media, and Lantern Books and Media. And we've got even more exciting news. Our Hen House is honored to roll out an audio series of the book, launching this October 2021. Narrated by the essay authors themselves, the 4-part series will air every Thursday throughout October. This will be in addition to our regular podcast schedule, of course. We cannot wait to share it with you. To find out more about the book and to pre-order it, visit encompassmovement.org/book. That's encompassmovement.org/book.
Anxieties are rising. This is a dramatic headline. This is from meetingplace.com. The Animal Ag Watch column by Hannah Thompson-Weeman. Californians, beware. DXE activists together. I just kind of have to read most of this article to you because it's that good. While we have certainly continued to see protests and other disruptive activity by animal rights extremists, despite restrictions on travel and gatherings due to the pandemic, we have yet to see any in-person extremist conferences over the past 18 months. Unfortunately, that is about to change this week as Direct Action Everywhere is set to host its Animal Liberation Conference in Oakland, California, starting on Friday. You might be wondering why we should care about animal rights extremists. That's her word, people who care about animals. Gathering for a conference. Unfortunately, DXE's conferences are not known solely for speakers making outlandish claims about animal agriculture. The hallmark of its gatherings are large-scale open rescues and mass protests in which hundreds of conference attendees descend upon unsuspecting farms, protest for hours, and steal livestock or poultry. Let me just insert here that I do not believe any theft is going on. I believe it's all rescue, as is put forth by DXE. So she talks about things that have been done in the past, the mass open rescue at an egg farm in Sonoma County a few years back, something at a duck farm in 2019, which ended with 80 arrests, and actually involved a small group of activists who entered the farm's processing facility, that would be their slaughterhouse, and chained themselves to plant equipment. Including a conveyor belt that ended up somehow being switched back on. I don't know that I remember that. Like, who switched that on and how much danger were people put in? Anyway, I digress. She goes on about the upcoming one. We always have to be thinking about the future. Let's stop dwelling on the past, Marianne. All farms, plants. That's, it's just so ironic that that's what they have come to call slaughterhouses, is plants. There's just something so deep about that. All farms, plants, and other facilities related to animal agriculture in California, particularly within a few hours of the Oakland area, need to be especially vigilant over the next 10 days. Well, basically she's right. They do this stuff. Not exactly what she characterizes them as doing, but let's face it, DXE puts these people back on their heels. So she suggests that they should, this is kind of stupid advice, really, be on the lookout for anything suspicious. 500 activists converging on your facility. I guess that would be suspicious. She talks about emails or phone calls seeking information, unexpected visitors, like 500 of them, or any indication that someone has been on the property, doors or gates left open, items left behind. I guess she means that that might mean they're planning on targeting you. Well, yeah, they might be. So yeah, be really upset, be really scared, spend a lot of money making preparations, all of you. I think it's a great idea. All right. Our next story is from the National Pork Producers Council. Yeah, National Pork Producers Council. AFBF NPPC filed Prop 12 appeal to Supreme Court. So AFBF is the American Farm Bureau Federation, and along with the Pork Producers Council, they are going to the Supreme Court and filing a cert petition trying to get permission to further attempt to litigate the decisions which upheld Prop 12, which of course set certain very minimal standards for animals raised in California and for animals raised whose bodies are then subsequently sold in California. They are only concerned with the pigs, so they say, which would ban the sale of pork from hogs that don't meet the state's, quote, arbitrary, unquote, production standards. I don't know who they're quoting by calling them arbitrary. They think they're arbitrary. It seems a little weird. Or they claim to. This case has already gone through federal court, and the Ninth Circuit upheld Prop 12. And they say that the Ninth Circuit precedent runs counter to numerous Supreme Court decisions and is in conflict with nearly every other federal circuit court. Well, that certainly ain't true. I actually had a wonderful student who wrote a law review article on this very case and the dormant commerce clause, and pointed out how the Ninth Circuit precedent is well in accord with other circuits. There is, I think, some Fifth Circuit precedent that might go in the other direction, which she felt was extremely outdated, not just on, well, I'm getting a little too legally here, aren't I? Anyway, they're wrong. It's not, this is not an aberrational decision. If you're interested in the details, that law review article will be published in the Cornell Law Review. Of course, it takes forever for not just Cornell, but all law reviews to get articles out there. But I'm very excited that article is out there. It's by my wonderful student, Emma Horn. According to this, getting back to the article, supporters of Proposition 12 claimed it would improve animal welfare and food safety. The law fails to address either of those issues, said the Farm Bureau president, Zippy Duval. That is the Farm Bureau president's name, Zippy. And I shouldn't laugh. People are allowed to have whatever names they want. Farmers know the best way to care for their animals. Oh, my God. Oh, my God. So in the first place, of course, this addresses animal welfare. That's what it's all about. It's about giving animals a tiny bit more space. Like, what else would it be addressing? But no, what we're supposed to do is just trust the farmers because, they treat animals so well. And then they talk about small family farms, how they're going to be forced to make expensive and unnecessary changes all over the country, which means that California is regulating for outside its border. This is such bullshit. Like, Like California is regulating what can be sold in California. That's it. They're not making anybody else around the country do anything. If they want to sell in California, they have to do that. Oh, they also point out that the California Department of Food and Agriculture, guess whose side they're on, which is still writing the implementing regulations for Prop 12, I'm sure they're avoiding it as long as possible, admitted the initiative will have no effect on food safety and actually will increase the mortality rate for sows subject to it. Well, whose side do you think the California Department of Food and Agriculture is on, as I just pointed out? I'm repeating myself. They say that industry estimates for converting sow barns or building new ones to meet the Prop 12 standards are in the billions of dollars, with consumers bearing the ultimate cost through higher pork prices. Well, I have such an easy fix for that. Consumers can just stop buying pork. If they can't pay for animals to be treated well, then maybe they can't afford it, which they can't, because if animals were treated well, it wouldn't exist. Nuisance birds may be showing up soon. This is from Drovers. And this is just, it's actually mostly about dairy production. And I'm not sure why this is specifically a dairy problem, but apparently it is. Nuisance birds is their name mostly for starlings. They also talk a little bit about pigeons, but they're mostly talking about starlings. And it's funny, we were talking about that movie. Jasmine was talking about it earlier in the episode, that movie, which she says was not that great, which I thought may be good, which features a starling. I can't remember the name of it now. But this is about starlings and how much dairy farmers hate them. Ricky Woods, who is the USDA Wildlife Services Specialist. Wildlife Services is, of course, the section of the government that is devoted to killing wildlife, ironically named. He said he typically sees migratory birds like starlings, returning from about late October until March. Starlings are, in his words, recruiters. So they may come back to the same site year after year with not only their offspring, but other birds that have joined the flock along the way. So that makes them recruiters because they go back home and other birds sometimes join them. Recruiters. Weird. According to Woods, one starling will eat about a penny's worth of feed per day. Quote, that may not sound like a lot. Actually, it does kind of sound like a lot to me, but it can add up to huge losses when you consider thousands of birds residing on farms for several months. And these flocks are huge. According to this article, they range in size from 1,000 to 100,000 birds traveling together. You've seen those beautiful pictures of starlings flying in these incredible formations. In addition to the feed loss, birds like starlings and pigeons can tear insulation out of barns and contaminate the feed that cows consume. That's because it's sitting out there, and there are animals like birds out there. And if you want to protect the feed that cows consume, then keep it inside. Woods said the feces and feathers from invasive birds can spread all these sort of diseases. Well, that seems avoidable. Take care of your cows. Put their feed inside. Spend a little money, guys. So there are techniques for getting rid of them. Actually, they are lethal, but they're not completely lethal because starlings are just too good at what they do. These are some of their suggestions: pyrotechnics, noisemakers, trapping, and toxicants. The goal of the eradication program, though they call it eradication, is just to make them fly somewhere else. So to make them uncomfortable, not necessarily to kill them because it would just be too hard to kill them all. I'm sure they would love to kill them all. So fireworks, of course, pyrotechnics, chemical toxicants like Avitrol and DRC 1339, that would be poisons, are restricted use pesticides, as well they should be. While they will kill some birds, their true purpose is to scare birds away. So the goal here is to kill enough of them so the rest of them get scared. But they actually don't think that they can, manage to kill them all, which is, pretty surprising because there's nothing these people love to do better. Shooting is not an effective way to drastically reduce the bird population, but will help to frighten them. Again, it'll kill some of them. And that's a great thing, because if you kill some of them, the rest of them will get scared. If dairy is struggling with a bird problem, Wood said the best approach is to contact a USDA Wildlife Services representative. Their initial assessment and advice should be at no cost to the producer. And that, folks, is your tax money at work. And that's it for this week's Rising Anxieties.
Well, that's it for this week's show. As always, if you like the podcast and if you're able, you can support us by joining the flock at ourhenhouse.org/donate for $10 a month or $100 a year, or you can make whatever donation you're comfortable with.
Another great way to support us is to leave a fabulous review wherever you listen to podcasts or on Apple Podcasts, or you can like us on Facebook or follow us on Twitter or Instagram at Our Hen House. If you shop on Amazon, you can use Amazon Smile using Our Hen House as your favored charity. And of course, tell your friends about us.
If you're one of our listeners who already supports us, thank you so much. I'm Jasmine Singer. Thank you to my co-host, Marianne Sullivan.
That's me.
And to Jen Riley for her work in producing this podcast, and to composer Michael Herron for the music. Thanks to Jocelyn Martinez for her work doing research, and for Eric Montgomery of Podcast Haven for his work editing. Thanks to Lori Johnston of Two Trick Pony for her graphic design services.
We will be back next week with a brand new show, so don't forget to subscribe in Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you are a Flock member, remember to check your email or the Flock Facebook page on Tuesday for your bonus content.
Thanks so much for tuning in and for changing the world for animals.